The date is March 1st, 1896, and right now, in the mountains of northern Ethiopia, something impossible is about to happen. An African army is about to humiliate a European colonial power so badly that the shockwaves will reach every corner of the globe. This isn't going to be some small skirmish that gets buried in the footnotes. This is going to be a full-scale battlefield catastrophe where a modern European military force gets systematically destroyed by warriors they thought they could brush aside like dust. Here's what you need to know before we dive in. By 1896, the scramble for Africa is almost complete. Europeans have carved up an entire continent like it's a Sunday roast. The British control Egypt and Sudan. The French have West Africa. The Germans are in East Africa. The Portuguese and Spanish have their pieces. Belgium has the Congo, which is less a colony and more a massive crime scene. And Italy, desperate to join the Imperial Club, has set its sights on Ethiopia. Not part of Ethiopia. Not a slice of Ethiopia. All of it. But Ethiopia is not like the other African kingdoms the Europeans have been rolling over. This place has been a functioning empire for thousands of years. While Europeans were still painting themselves blue and hitting each other with rocks, Ethiopia had written language, stone architecture, international trade networks, and a Christian monarchy that traces its lineage back to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. When Rome was collapsing into chaos and barbarian invasions, Ethiopia was thriving. This is a civilization with depth, with infrastructure, with pride. And right now, it's ruled by a man who's about to teach the Italians the most expensive lesson in their history. His name is Menelik II, Emperor of Ethiopia, and he's been preparing for this war for a decade. Not reacting to it. Preparing for it. While the Italians thought they were playing chess, Menelik was already 10 moves ahead. He's been buying weapons from anyone who'll sell them. He's been stockpiling ammunition. He's been training his army. He's been building alliances with regional lords who usually spend their time fighting each other. And most importantly, he's been watching. Watching how the Italians move. Watching how they think. Watching their arrogance grow with every small victory they achieve against smaller opponents. The Italians, led by General Orest Baratieri, think this is going to be easy. They've already grabbed Eritrea to the north. They've signed a treaty with Menelik that they immediately mistranslated to make it look like Ethiopia is their protectorate. When Menelik figures out what happened and calls them out on this blatant fraud, they double down. They refuse to acknowledge the deception. They think African armies are disorganized mobs who'll scatter at the first volley. They think European discipline and rifles will win the day. They think their 100 years of colonial victories across Africa and Asia mean this one is guaranteed. They're about to learn otherwise in the most brutal way possible. Let's go back and understand how we got here, because this didn't start with a battle. It started with a lie. In 1889, Italy and Ethiopia signed the Treaty of Wuchel. The treaty is written in 2 languages, Italian and Amharic. In the Italian version of this treaty, Article 17 states that Ethiopia must conduct all foreign affairs through Italy, effectively making Ethiopia an Italian protectorate. In the Amharic version that Menelik signed, the same article says Ethiopia may use Italy for foreign affairs if it chooses to. Not must. May. Not the same thing. Not even close. When Menelik figures out what happened, he's furious. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is deliberate fraud. The Italians are trying to claim sovereignty over Ethiopia through a forged treaty. He tells them to get lost. They refuse. They start pushing further into Ethiopian territory, building forts, establishing military outposts, claiming land. They're testing him. Seeing if he'll back down. Seeing if he's just another African ruler who'll cave to European pressure. He won't. Menelik declares the treaty void in February 1893. The Italians ignore him. They keep pushing. So in September 1895, Menelik does something unprecedented in Ethiopian history. He sends out a mobilization order to every corner of the empire. Not just to his professional army. Not just to the nobles and their retinues. To everyone. Every regional lord. Every tribal leader. Every province. Every able-bodied man who can hold a spear or fire a rifle. The message is simple and direct. Foreign invaders are on our soil, and we're driving them out together. Put aside your local disputes. Put aside your rivalries. Put aside your feuds. This is existential. This is survival. And they listen. Now, before we see exactly how Menelik turns this mobilization into the largest indigenous African army ever assembled to fight a European power, let me ask you something. If you're getting something out of this, if this is the kind of history you wish you'd been taught in school, do me one favor. Hit that like button. Drop a comment. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'm not here to waste your time with fluff and filler. This is real history. The decisions that shaped continents. The battles that changed everything. No clickbait. No dumbed-down nonsense. Just the facts, the strategy, and the blood. That's all I'm asking. Now let's get back to 1895, because Menelik's call to arms is about to create something the Italians never saw coming. By early 1896, Menelik has assembled an army of somewhere between 100,000 to 120,000 men. The exact number is debated by historians because Ethiopian record-keeping wasn't as systematic as European military bureaucracy, but the scale is undeniable. Some are equipped with modern rifles. Menelik has been buying weapons for years from anyone willing to sell. French arms dealers happy to undermine Italian ambitions. Russian suppliers looking for influence in the region. Even Italians, in one of history's beautiful ironies, sold weapons to Ethiopia before the war started because merchants don't care about politics when there's profit to be made. Others carry swords, spears, and shields. Traditional weapons that have been used in Ethiopian warfare for centuries. But don't mistake traditional for primitive. These men know how to fight. They've been fighting regional wars, tribal conflicts, and border skirmishes their entire lives. Ethiopian warriors are tough, experienced, and utterly fearless. They're used to harsh terrain, limited supplies, and brutal combat. They're not parade ground soldiers. They're fighters. The army isn't just one unified force. It's organized into regional contingents led by powerful nobles, each commanding their own warriors who owe personal loyalty to their lord. There's Ras Alula, a legendary military commander who's been fighting Italians for years in border skirmishes and knows their tactics inside and out. There's Ras Makoen, Menelik's cousin and one of his most trusted generals, commanding forces from Harar province. There's Ras Mengesha, ruler of Tigray, who controls the northern territories closest to Italian Eritrea and has the most experience fighting Europeans. And there's Empress Teitu Batul, Menelik's wife, who isn't just ceremonial royalty sitting in a palace somewhere. She's a political force, a strategic thinker, and a battlefield commander in her own right. She'll lead troops at Adwa, personally, from the front lines. This level of coordination is unprecedented in Ethiopian history. Ethiopia's regional lords are notorious for fighting each other. Constant power struggles. Border disputes. Blood feuds that go back generations. Personal vendettas. Competition for the emperor's favor. But Menelik has managed to convince them that this threat is different. The Italians aren't here to negotiate trade deals or establish diplomatic relations or secure a coastal port. They're here to conquer. To colonize. To erase Ethiopian sovereignty and turn the entire empire into an Italian possession. Every regional lord understands that if Menelik falls, they're next. Italian colonialism doesn't negotiate with nobles. It replaces them. So they come. They bring their warriors. They put aside their grievances. For now. The logistics of moving and feeding an army this size are staggering. We're talking about 100,000 men marching through mountainous terrain, needing food, water, ammunition, medical supplies, shelter. Menelik's administration organizes supply lines stretching across the empire. Local populations are mobilized to provide grain, livestock, pack animals. Women follow the army by the thousands, cooking, carrying supplies, tending to the wounded, maintaining the infrastructure that keeps the army functional. This isn't just a military campaign. It's a national effort. The entire empire is mobilized for war. The Italian army, meanwhile, has about 17,700 men total in the region. Around 10,600 of them are Italian soldiers proper. The rest are Eritrean askaris, local troops recruited, trained, and equipped by the Italians. They've got modern Viterli rifles, Hotchkiss artillery pieces, machine guns, and the confidence that comes from decades of mowing down African armies from Algeria to Somalia. But they're exhausted. Supply lines stretching from the coast through hostile territory are stretched dangerously thin. The Italian government is trying to wage a colonial war on a shoestring budget because the Italian economy is weak and colonial wars are expensive, and it shows. Rations are short. Medical supplies are inadequate. Morale is cracking. Disease is spreading through the camps. Dysentery. Malaria. Men are dying before they even see combat. And General Baratieri is under enormous political pressure from Rome to do something decisive before the rainy season starts in a few weeks and makes campaigning completely impossible. Baratieri is a competent officer with experience in colonial warfare, but he's in an impossible position. He knows his army is outnumbered at least 5-1. He knows his men are tired, sick, and undersupplied. He knows the Ethiopians have the advantage of terrain, local knowledge, and supply lines that actually work. But Rome is screaming at him to attack. The Italian press is calling him a coward. Newspapers are questioning his courage and competence. Politicians are demanding a glorious victory to justify the expense of this colonial adventure and to salvage Italy's international reputation. And the clock is ticking. Every day he waits, his position gets weaker. The Ethiopians are getting stronger. More regional contingents are arriving daily. Their supply situation is actually improving while his deteriorates. But attacking a force 5 times his size is suicide. He's trapped between military reality and political pressure. In late February 1896, Baratieri moves his army forward to the town of Adwa, deep in Ethiopian territory. He's camping on a plateau near the town, trying to establish a defensive position and bait Menelik into attacking uphill into Italian guns. Classic European colonial tactics. Entrench. Fortify. Use your superior firepower to create a killing field. Let the enemy break themselves against your defensive position. This worked at Rorke's Drift against the Zulus. It worked in countless colonial battles across Africa. The Europeans take position. The Africans charge with spears. The Europeans mow them down with rifles and artillery. Victory, glory, conquest. That's the script. But Menelik doesn't follow the script. He doesn't take the bait. He just sits there, on higher ground about 10 miles away, with a vastly larger army, watching. Waiting. He knows time is on his side. The Italians are running out of food. Their supply situation is a disaster. Ethiopian scouts are watching every move the Italians make. Menelik knows exactly how many men Baratieri has. He knows where they're positioned. He knows what condition they're in. He knows they're getting weaker every day. So he waits. Patience is a weapon. Sometimes the best move is to do nothing and let your enemy destroy himself. Baratieri is stuck. If he retreats, he's humiliated. His career is over. He'll probably face court-martial for cowardice. Italy's colonial ambitions in East Africa take a massive hit. The government might fall. If he attacks uphill into a force 5 times his size with exhausted, starving men, he's insane. That's not tactics. That's suicide. But if he stays where he is, his army slowly starves and disintegrates. Soldiers are already deserting. Disease is spreading faster. There's no good option. Every choice leads to disaster. So he decides on something desperate. Something bold. Something that requires perfect execution and a bit of luck. A night march. He's going to move his entire army under cover of darkness, climb the mountains surrounding Menelik's position, and hit the Ethiopian camp at dawn from multiple directions simultaneously. Surprise is the only advantage Baratieri has left. If he can catch the Ethiopians unprepared, if he can create chaos in their camp before they can organize, maybe, just maybe, he can win this. It's a massive gamble. Night marches are dangerous even in familiar terrain with fresh troops. In unfamiliar mountain terrain with exhausted, malnourished soldiers, it's insanely risky. But Baratieri is out of options. He holds a council of war with his brigade commanders. Some of them think the plan is insane. Others think it's their only chance. In the end, they agree. They'll move tonight. They'll attack at dawn. It's all or nothing. It's late on the night of February 29th, going into March 1st. The Italian army begins its night march. They're moving in 4 separate brigades under different commanders, each taking a different route, trying to converge on the Ethiopian position from multiple directions. The plan is to reach their attack positions by dawn and launch a coordinated assault that will overwhelm the Ethiopians before they can react. Surprise is everything. Coordination is everything. Timing is everything. And it all goes wrong almost immediately. The guides get lost. The terrain is rougher and more complex than the maps indicated. Units get separated in the darkness. Communication breaks down completely. Officers can't see their own men in the pitch black. There are no radios, no signal flares, no way to coordinate across miles of mountain terrain. Just whispered orders in the dark, the sound of thousands of boots on rocky ground, and the hope that everyone ends up in the right place at the right time. They don't. By the time the sun starts coming up on March 1, 1896, the Italian brigades are scattered across the mountainside, miles apart, completely out of position, unable to support each other, and fully visible to Ethiopian scouts who have been watching them all night. Ethiopian intelligence is exceptional. Local guides who know every path, every ridge, every valley have been tracking Italian movements since they left camp. Runners have been sprinting back to Menelik's headquarters with constant updates. Menelik knows exactly where every Italian brigade is. He knows they're separated. He knows they're vulnerable. He knows the perfect moment to strike has arrived. The element of surprise is gone. The coordination is shattered. Each Italian brigade is now isolated, separated from the others by miles of rough terrain, unable to communicate, unable to support each other. Baratieri's gamble has failed before the first shot is even fired. But the battle is about to start anyway, and it's going to be a massacre. Menelik sees this disaster unfolding in real time from his command position and makes his decision instantly. He doesn't wait for the Italians to get organized. He doesn't give them time to regroup or figure out where they are or establish communications. He orders an immediate, all-out attack. Horns sound across the Ethiopian camp. Drums begin beating out the rhythm of war. Ethiopian forces come pouring down the mountains from 3 directions like an avalanche, tens of thousands of warriors moving with purpose and coordination, and the Battle of Adwa begins. The 1st Italian Brigade to get hit is on the right flank, commanded by General Vittorio de Bormida. He's got about 2,500 men, mostly Italian regulars with some Eritrean askaris mixed in. He thinks he's advancing on empty hills, moving into position to hit what he believes is Menelik's left flank. He thinks he has time to get organized before fighting starts. He's catastrophically wrong. Thousands of Ethiopian warriors led by Ras Alula, one of Menelik's most experienced and aggressive commanders, slam into his position like a hammer. De Bormida's troops try desperately to form defensive lines, but they're in broken terrain with no visibility, no clear fields of fire, surrounded by rocks and gullies that provide perfect cover for attackers. Ethiopian riflemen are firing from elevated positions, picking off Italian officers and NCOs with practiced precision. Ethiopian cavalry is circling wide around both flanks, moving fast, getting behind Italian positions to cut off any retreat. De Bormida realizes within minutes that he's been cut off from the rest of the army. He's alone, surrounded, outnumbered 10-1. And the Ethiopians are coming from every direction. His men fight desperately because what else can they do? They form tight defensive squares and pour rifle fire into the masses of Ethiopian warriors charging toward them. They're disciplined. They're well trained. Italian firepower is devastating at first. Ethiopians fall by the dozens, by the hundreds. But they keep coming. For every Ethiopian who falls, 3 more take his place. The math is simple and brutal. Debourmida has 2,500 men. He's facing 25,000 or more. He can kill 10 Ethiopians for every Italian and he'll still lose. It's not a question of if he loses. It's a question of how long he can hold out. Ethiopian tactics are sophisticated. Units don't just charge mindlessly into rifle fire and die. They use terrain for cover. They advance in coordinated waves, one group providing covering fire while another moves forward. Ethiopian commanders are using traditional horn and drum signals to coordinate movements across the battlefield, and their warriors respond instantly. When Ethiopian riflemen get into good positions, they lay down suppressing fire that's surprisingly accurate. Many of these men trained with their weapons for months. They're not experts, but they're competent. And when Ethiopian warriors armed with swords and spears get into close combat range, Italian bayonets and discipline don't mean much against men who've been fighting with blades their entire lives and have no fear of death. Debourmida's ammunition starts running low. His men are firing as fast as they can, but they can't maintain this rate forever. Officers are getting picked off by Ethiopian sharpshooters who've identified them by their uniforms and are targeting them specifically. Men are panicking as they realize there's no help coming, no reinforcements, no way out. Some try to retreat. There's nowhere to go. Ethiopian cavalry cuts them down as they run. Others try to surrender, dropping their rifles and raising their hands. Some are taken prisoner, disarmed and dragged away. Others aren't so lucky and are killed on the spot in the chaos and fury of battle. The fighting is savage and brutal and utterly merciless. Hand-to-hand combat. Close quarters savagery. Men grappling in the dirt. Bayonets and swords. Screaming. Dust. Blood. General Debourmida is killed in the fighting, cut down while trying to rally his men for one last stand. His entire brigade is annihilated over the course of a few hours. Not routed. Not defeated and scattered. Annihilated. Wiped from existence. By mid-morning, there are almost no survivors from Debourmida's command. An entire Italian brigade has ceased to exist. The center column, under General Giuseppe Albert I, doesn't fare any better. He's got about 4,000 men, including a large number of Eritrean askaris who are excellent soldiers but realize pretty quickly that they're on the wrong side of this fight. They advance into what looks like a valley, seeking to link up with the other brigades, and immediately come under withering fire from Ethiopian forces under the direct command of Empress Taytu Batul. She's not sitting in a tent miles behind the lines giving orders through messengers. She's on the battlefield, on horseback, visible to her troops, directing the attack, rallying warriors, coordinating movements with other Ethiopian commanders. Ethiopian warriors see her and fight harder. She's their empress. She's leading them into battle. They'll die before they let her down. Albert I tries desperately to hold his position, forming defensive lines and returning fire, but the Ethiopians just keep coming. Wave after wave. His men are firing as fast as they can reload, working their rifles until the barrels are too hot to touch, but for every Ethiopian who falls, 3 more take his place. The numerical disparity is overwhelming. Albert I has 4,000 men. He's facing 30,000 or more. No amount of discipline or firepower can overcome those odds. Italian artillery tries to open up, crews working frantically to get their guns into action, but they can't depress the barrels low enough to hit targets at close range. The Ethiopians are too close, moving too fast, and the gunners are getting picked off by rifle fire before they can get rounds downrange. When the Ethiopian cavalry charges, it's absolute chaos. Thousands of horses and riders crashing through defensive lines like a tidal wave. Cavalry sabers flashing in the morning sun. Horses trampling men into the dirt. Hand-to-hand combat spreading across the entire battlefield. Italian lines break apart. Units lose cohesion. It becomes every man for himself. Some soldiers keep fighting in small groups, back to back, trying to survive. Others throw down their weapons and run. Most don't make it far. General Albertone's brigade disintegrates as a fighting force. Albert I himself is captured, pulled from his horse by Ethiopian warriors and dragged into captivity where he'll spend the next several months as a prisoner of war. The 3rd Italian Brigade, commanded by General Aramondi, is supposed to be the reserve force, positioned to reinforce wherever the attack goes well. But it gets pulled into the desperate fighting almost immediately when it becomes clear that the other 2 brigades are being slaughtered. Aramondi's men try to create a defensive perimeter on high ground, the classic last stand position, but they're already taking fire from 3 sides. Ethiopian commanders are moving their forces with precision and coordination that would impress any European general staff. They're encircling Italian positions, cutting off retreat routes, concentrating overwhelming force at key points. This isn't mob tactics. This isn't a disorganized charge. This is sophisticated, coordinated military strategy executed by commanders who know exactly what they're doing. Ethiopian officers are using traditional horn and drum signals to communicate across the battlefield, and their warriors respond instantly, wheeling and pivoting and concentrating force like they've drilled this maneuver 100 times. Because they have. Menelik spent months training this army, getting regional contingents to work together, establishing communication protocols, drilling coordination. This is preparation paying off. This is the fruit of years of planning and training and strategic thinking. The Italians thought they were fighting a mob. They're fighting an army. General Baratieri, watching this unfolding catastrophe from his command position several miles away, realizes with growing horror that he's lost control of the battle. He's lost control of his army. His carefully planned attack has turned into a nightmare. His brigades are scattered across miles of mountainside, cut off from each other, being overwhelmed piecemeal. He tries to organize a fighting retreat, sending messengers galloping in every direction with orders to pull back to defensible positions, but there's nowhere to retreat to. Ethiopian forces have cut the roads. The mountain passes that the Italians used to advance are now swarming with thousands of Ethiopian warriors hunting for Italian survivors. The only escape route is back the way they came, through terrain that's a nightmare even in daylight and with fresh troops, now filled with enemy soldiers looking for blood. His army is being carved apart piece by piece, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. The Italian left flank brigade, under General Elena, manages to hold together longer than the others through a combination of good defensive terrain and concentrated firepower. They're positioned on a rocky ridge with good fields of fire, and they've managed to get their artillery working effectively. Ethiopian attacks break against their lines multiple times. Italian gunners are working their artillery pieces as fast as humanly possible, loading and firing, pouring shells into masses of charging Ethiopians. The carnage is horrific. Bodies pile up in front of Italian positions. Ethiopian casualties in this sector are staggering, hundreds dead, thousands wounded. But they keep coming. The Ethiopians can afford casualties that would shatter any European army. They have numerical superiority so overwhelming that losses don't matter in the same way. And when Emperor Menelik commits his strategic reserve, fresh troops who've been held back for exactly this moment, tens of thousands of warriors who haven't fired a shot yet, who aren't tired, who aren't running low on ammunition, Elena's brigade finally collapses. They're simply overwhelmed by sheer numbers. When 3 fresh Ethiopian brigades hit your position simultaneously from multiple directions and you're already exhausted and running low on ammunition, there's only one possible outcome. The position is overrun. Italian soldiers are killed or captured by the hundreds. General Elena survives and manages to retreat with a fraction of his original command, but his brigade as a fighting force has been destroyed. By early afternoon, maybe 2 p.m., the Italian army has ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. It's been 6 hours since the battle started. 6 hours of continuous, brutal combat. Units are scattered across miles of mountain terrain. Officers are dead or captured or separated from their men. Command and control has broken down completely. There's no communication between units. There's no coordination. There's no leadership. Men are running in every direction, throwing away their rifles and equipment to run faster, trying desperately to escape. Ethiopian cavalry is hunting them down across the mountains. Some Italians manage to surrender and are taken prisoner, disarmed, stripped of their uniforms, bound, and marched away. Others are cut down while fleeing, killed from behind as they run. It's butchery on an industrial scale, but it's not mindless slaughter. The Ethiopians are methodically eliminating an invading army that came to conquer their homeland. There's no mercy here. There's no chivalry. There's only survival and retribution. The retreat becomes a rout, which becomes a massacre. Italian soldiers abandon everything, throwing away rifles, ammunition, packs, anything that slows them down. They abandon wounded comrades screaming for help because stopping means death. Officers lose control of their men completely. Unit cohesion vanishes. It becomes every man for himself, pure survival instinct, running blindly through unfamiliar mountains hoping to somehow make it back to Italian lines in Eritrea, 60 miles away through hostile territory. Ethiopian warriors chase them for miles, hunting survivors through the mountain passes. Some Italians hide in caves and ravines, trying to wait out the pursuit, hoping the Ethiopians will give up and go home. Most get found, eventually. The few who make it back to Italian-controlled territory arrive days later, exhausted, starving, dehydrated, traumatized, barely able to speak. They tell stories of an apocalypse. Of entire brigades wiped out in hours. Of Ethiopian warriors who seemed to be everywhere at once. Of a battle that went catastrophically wrong from the very first minute and never got better. The casualty numbers, when they're finally calculated, are absolutely staggering. Out of roughly 17,700 Italian and Eritrean troops who marched to Adwa, approximately 7,000 are killed in action. Another 1,500 are wounded, many of whom will die from their wounds in the following days because medical care is non-existent. Around 3,000 are captured, including hundreds of officers. That's a loss rate of nearly 70%. Only about 30% of the Italian army escapes. Entire brigades wiped out. 4 out of 5 brigade commanders killed or captured. The Italian army in East Africa has been destroyed as an effective fighting force. It will take months to reconstitute, and by then the political situation will have changed completely. General Baratieri survives the battle, fleeing from the battlefield with the shattered remnants of his command, a broken man leading broken soldiers. His career is over. His reputation is destroyed. He'll be court-martialed when he gets back to Italy, though he'll eventually be acquitted after a lengthy trial where he successfully argues that he was following orders from Rome and that the disaster was the inevitable result of political pressure forcing him to attack before he was ready. But his military career is finished. History will remember him as the man who lost an entire army to Africans. Ethiopian casualties are much harder to pin down with precision because Ethiopian record-keeping wasn't as systematic and bureaucratic as European military administration, and different Ethiopian sources give wildly different numbers. Conservative estimates from historians who've studied the battle put Ethiopian dead at somewhere around 4,000 to 7,000 killed, with another 10,000 wounded. Those are heavy losses in absolute terms. The Ethiopians bled heavily for this victory. In raw numbers, they may have lost as many or even more men than the Italians. But in relative terms, it's a completely different picture. The Italians lost 70% of their entire army. The Ethiopians lost maybe 10% of theirs, perhaps less. When you win decisively, when you achieve your strategic objectives, heavy losses are the price of victory and you can absorb them because your army still exists and still functions. When you're getting annihilated, when your army is scattered and destroyed, losses are catastrophic and irreplaceable. News of the Battle of Adwa reaches Europe over the following weeks, carried by telegraph lines and steamship, and it hits like an earthquake. The Italians tried to control the narrative at first. Vague official communiques. Carefully worded press releases about a tactical withdrawal. Sanitized language designed to hide the scope of the disaster. But you can't spin away 7,000 dead soldiers. You can't hide the loss of an entire army. Survivors start arriving back in Italy with the truth. Wounded soldiers in hospitals tell journalists what really happened. An entire European army destroyed by Africans. Not ambushed by savages in the jungle. Not surprised in unfamiliar terrain. Defeated in open, pitched battle through superior tactics, superior strategy, superior coordination, and overwhelming numbers intelligently employed. The racist assumptions that underpinned the entire European imperial project just took a sledgehammer to the face. If Africans can do this, if they can organize armies of 100,000 men, if they can coordinate complex military operations, if they can defeat modern European forces in open battle, what does that say about European racial superiority? What does that say about the civilizing mission? What does that say about the inevitability of European dominance? The cognitive dissonance is massive. European newspapers struggle to explain how this could have happened. Some blame Baratieri's incompetence. Some blame Italian military weakness. Some claim the Ethiopians had unfair advantages like superior numbers and knowledge of terrain, as if warfare has ever been fair. But the basic fact remains undeniable. Africans defeated Europeans. Comprehensively. Decisively. The Italian public is outraged, but not primarily at Ethiopia. They're outraged at their own government. What the hell were we doing in Ethiopia in the first place? Why did we send our sons to die in African mountains for a colonial possession we didn't need? Who authorized this disaster? Whose idea was this war? The political fallout is immediate and severe. Italy's government collapses. Prime Minister Francesco Crispi, who pushed aggressively for the war, who ignored warning signs that the campaign was going badly, who pressured Baratieri to attack despite unfavorable conditions, resigns in complete disgrace. His political career is over. He's replaced by a new government under Antonio di Rudini that immediately begins peace negotiations. Italy, the would-be conqueror, comes begging for terms. In the Treaty of Addis Ababa, signed in October 1896, Italy formally recognizes Ethiopia's absolute and complete independence. They give up any claim to being a protectorate. They acknowledge that the Treaty of Wuchel was based on a mistranslation and is void. They withdraw completely from occupied Ethiopian territory. They pay reparations to Ethiopia. They release all prisoners of war. Ethiopia remains the only African nation, aside from Liberia, which was never colonized because it was founded by freed American slaves, to completely avoid colonization during the Scramble for Africa. And it's entirely because of this battle. One decisive victory secured Ethiopian sovereignty for the next 4 decades. But the impact of Adwa goes far, far beyond Ethiopia's borders and far beyond the immediate political consequences. This battle becomes a symbol that resonates across the colonized world. Across Africa, colonized peoples hear about what happened at Adwa and they take hope. Maybe European domination isn't inevitable. Maybe resistance is possible. Maybe we can fight back. In the Caribbean, African diaspora communities celebrate Ethiopian victory in churches and town halls. In the United States, Black newspapers run triumphant headlines about Ethiopia defeating Italy. African American activists and intellectuals like W.E.B. Du Bois point to Adwa as definitive proof of African capability, dignity, and potential. The battle becomes a rallying point for Pan-Africanism, the political and intellectual movement arguing that people of African descent around the world share common interests and should support each other's liberation struggles. Ethiopia itself becomes a powerful symbol of Black independence and resistance to colonialism. The fact that an African nation not only survived European colonization but defeated a European army in battle becomes central to Pan-African ideology. When Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican political leader and activist, talks about African pride and the need for Black self-determination, he constantly invokes Ethiopia as proof that Black people can govern themselves and defend their sovereignty. When Rastafarianism develops in Jamaica in the 1930s, Ethiopia is absolutely central to the theology. Haile Selassie, Ethiopia's emperor from 1930 to 1974, becomes a messianic figure in Rastafarian belief partly because he rules the nation that defeated European colonizers at Adwa. The psychological and symbolic impact of this battle is genuinely immeasurable. It fundamentally changed how Africans and people of African descent saw themselves and their place in the world. After the battle, Italian prisoners of war faced a grim and brutal reality. Ethiopian law and custom, particularly for dealing with invaders, allowed for the mutilation of captured enemy soldiers. Many Italian prisoners, especially officers and those identified as having committed atrocities against Ethiopian civilians during the campaign, had their right hands and left feet amputated. This was done systematically, deliberately, as punishment and deterrent. It's brutal by any standard, and European newspapers seized on these stories with horror and outrage, running graphic descriptions and illustrations of mutilated Italian soldiers as evidence of African savagery and barbarism. The stories reinforced racist stereotypes even as Europeans tried to process their shocking military defeat. But this wasn't random cruelty or sadistic violence for its own sake. It was a calculated, deliberate deterrent with a clear strategic purpose. The message Menelik was sending to Italy and to every other European power was crystal clear. If you invade our land, if you try to conquer us, if you wage war against Ethiopia, this is what happens. We will defeat you on the battlefield, and if we capture you, you will carry the physical scars of your defeat for the rest of your life. The Ethiopians wanted to make absolutely sure that Italy never tried this again. They wanted every European power to understand that colonizing Ethiopia would be expensive in ways that went far beyond battlefield casualties and financial cost. It would be personally expensive for every soldier who participated. And it worked. Italy didn't return to Ethiopia until 1935, nearly 40 years later, and only under Benito Mussolini's fascist regime with tanks, aircraft, and poison gas. Emperor Menelik II ruled Ethiopia until his death in 1913, though his health declined significantly in his final years and effective power shifted to regents and eventually to his successor. His legacy is deeply complicated and contains profound contradictions. On one hand, he's an unquestionable national hero for defeating Italy and preserving Ethiopian independence when every other African nation was falling to European colonization. Statues of Menelik stand across Ethiopia today. He's celebrated in songs, in history books, in national memory and mythology. The Battle of Adwa is a national holiday. March 1st is Victory Day, a day of enormous pride and celebration. But Menelik also conquered and annexed neighboring regions and ethnic groups, expanding the Ethiopian empire southward and eastward at the expense of other African peoples. The Oromo people, the largest ethnic group in modern Ethiopia, were subjected to brutal military conquest and forced incorporation into Menelik's empire during his reign. Their lands were seized. Their autonomy was crushed. Their leaders were killed or co-opted. Menelik's Ethiopia was an empire, and empires expand through force and violence. He's celebrated as a hero of anti-colonialism while simultaneously acting as a colonizer himself within Africa. His reign was authoritarian and centralized power in the monarchy at the expense of regional autonomy. He maintained a feudal system that kept the vast majority of Ethiopians in grinding poverty, while a small noble class controlled land and wealth and political power. History is messy and complicated like that. Heroes aren't clean. The same man who preserved Ethiopian sovereignty against European imperialism also expanded that sovereignty through conquest of other Africans. The same emperor who unified the nation against foreign invasion maintained brutal and exploitative hierarchies within it. Menelik can simultaneously be a symbol of African resistance to colonialism and a symbol of internal oppression and imperial expansion. Those contradictory things coexist in the same historical figure. Recognizing that complexity and contradiction is important. Hagiography serves no one. Neither does simplistic condemnation. Historical figures contain multitudes. But on March 1, 1896, none of that moral ambiguity matters. On that specific day, in those specific mountains, Menelik and his army did something genuinely extraordinary that changed the course of history. They defeated a European power in open, conventional battle and forced the entire world to take notice and reconsider its assumptions. They proved that African armies could coordinate sophisticated military operations across tens of thousands of soldiers. They proved that African generals could outthink and outmaneuver European commanders. They proved that European technology and discipline weren't automatically superior to African numbers and motivation and strategic intelligence. They shattered the myth of European military invincibility that underpinned the entire colonial project. They secured their nation's independence when every other African nation was falling. That matters. That changed the world. Adwa became a rallying cry that echoed for generations. When Africans and colonized peoples around the world looked for historical proof that resistance to colonialism was possible, that fighting back could succeed, they pointed to Ethiopia and Adwa. When Pan-Africanists gathered in conferences in London and Paris and New York to discuss liberation and independence, they invoked Adwa as evidence that African peoples could defeat European powers. When anti-colonial movements gained momentum across Africa and Asia in the 20th century, they drew direct inspiration from the fact that Africans had defeated Europeans in battle and won their independence through military force. The psychological and political impact of that victory rippled across continents and decades. When the Italians came back in 1935 under Mussolini's fascist regime, Ethiopians remembered 1896 and fought like absolute hell. They lost that second war because Mussolini had no moral or legal qualms whatsoever about using chemical weapons, specifically mustard gas, dropped from aircraft onto soldiers and civilians alike in flagrant violation of international law. Ethiopian soldiers armed with rifles couldn't shoot down Italian bombers. The League of Nations condemned Italy's use of chemical weapons but did absolutely nothing to stop it. Ethiopia was conquered, occupied, and brutalized. The Italian occupation from 1936 to 1941 was horrific, marked by massacres, repression, and systematic violence against civilians. But Ethiopian resistance never stopped. Guerrilla fighters continued armed struggle throughout the occupation, making Italian control of the countryside tenuous at best. And when World War II turned decisively against Italy after their defeats in North Africa, when British forces invaded Ethiopia from Sudan and Kenya in 1941, Ethiopian resistance fighters rose up across the country and helped drive the Italians out. Emperor Haile Selassie, who had been living in exile in Britain, returned to Addis Ababa in triumph. Ethiopia regained its independence. It survived. Again. The spirit of Adwa lived on. The Battle of Adwa is objectively one of the most significant and consequential military engagements in African history, and yet it's barely mentioned in Western education systems. You might get a single paragraph in a world history textbook if you're extremely lucky. Maybe a footnote. More often, nothing at all. Complete silence. That's not an accident or an oversight. That's a deliberate choice. That's a decision by curriculum designers and textbook publishers to downplay and minimize an event that fundamentally contradicts the narrative of inevitable European dominance and African incapability that still shapes how history is taught in Western schools. It's easier and more comfortable to teach colonialism as inevitable, as the natural result of European technological and cultural superiority, than to explain in detail how an African army destroyed a European army through superior strategy, preparation, and leadership. So Adwa gets buried, forgotten, erased. But the facts don't care about comfortable narratives or ideological preferences. An African army destroyed a European army. That happened. It's documented. 7,000 Italian soldiers died in the mountains of northern Ethiopia. 3,000 more were captured. An entire Italian army ceased to exist as a fighting force. Italy's colonial ambitions in East Africa were permanently shattered. The Italian government collapsed. Ethiopia remained independent for another 40 years. Those are objective historical facts. They're uncomfortable for people invested in narratives of European exceptionalism and African primitiveness, but they're facts nonetheless. They're part of history whether anyone wants to acknowledge them or not. So here's what I want you to take away from this story. History isn't just about who had the biggest empire, or the most advanced technology, or the most powerful navy. It's fundamentally about decisions. Individual and collective choices made by human beings under extreme pressure that cascade into enormous consequences. Menelik made the decision to prepare for war years before it started when everyone told him to just negotiate and compromise. He made the decision to unify his fractious empire when fragmentation and civil war would have been easier. He made the decision to buy modern weapons, train soldiers to use them, build supply networks, and gather intelligence on his enemy. He made the decision to fight on his terms, on his ground, at a time of his choosing, with overwhelming numerical superiority intelligently deployed. Those were choices. Active, intentional decisions made by a leader who understood what was at stake and refused to accept defeat. Baratieri made the decision to gamble everything on a desperate night march instead of conducting a strategic retreat that would have saved most of his army. He made the decision to trust racist assumptions about African military inferiority instead of objectively assessing his enemy's capabilities. He made the decision to split his forces in unfamiliar terrain without adequate reconnaissance or contingency planning. He made the decision to let political pressure from Rome override his military judgment about what was tactically possible. Those were also choices. And they led directly to the annihilation of his army and the deaths of 7,000 men. Both men made choices. One led his nation to victory and secured its independence. The other led his army to slaughter and destroyed his own career. The difference wasn't fate or destiny or divine intervention. The difference wasn't even technology, though technology mattered. The difference was preparation, intelligence, terrain, and the willingness to think strategically instead of assuming victory. Menelik understood the battlefield in every dimension: geographic, logistical, psychological, political. Baratieri did not. That's the entire story in one sentence. And the terrain mattered enormously. The intelligence network mattered. The logistics mattered. The morale and motivation mattered. The Italians lost because they systematically underestimated all of these factors. They thought modern rifles and artillery would automatically overcome any disadvantage in numbers or terrain. They thought European military discipline would defeat African enthusiasm and courage. They thought their century of colonial victories across Africa meant this one was guaranteed. They were catastrophically wrong on every single count. The Ethiopians won because they understood at a deep level that war isn't just about technology or firepower. It's about preparation, coordination, intelligence, logistics, and the will to fight for something that matters. The Italians were fighting for imperial prestige and colonial territory. The Ethiopians were fighting for their homes, their families, their independence, their very existence as a sovereign nation. That difference in motivation showed decisively on the battlefield. Adwa should be taught in every history class in the world. It should be as famous and studied as Waterloo or Gettysburg or Stalingrad or any other decisive battle that changed the course of history. It's a story of strategic brilliance defeating tactical rigidity. It's a story of national unity overcoming internal division when survival demands it. It's a story of an underdog victory achieved not through luck or miracle, but through years of careful preparation and superior leadership. It's a story that inspired generations of anti-colonial movements, independence struggles, and liberation campaigns across the entire colonized world. It's a story that proved resistance was possible and victory was achievable. It matters. Changed history. It deserves to be remembered and taught and studied. But instead, it gets buried, ignored, minimized, treated as an aberration or footnote. And that's exactly why we're here. That's exactly why this video exists. To tell the stories that don't fit neatly into the comfortable narratives you were taught in school. To show you the battles and decisions and turning points that changed history but got erased from collective memory because they were ideologically inconvenient. To give you the full, complicated, uncomfortable picture instead of the sanitized version designed to make empires look inevitable and resistance look futile. If this story moved you, if it taught you something genuinely new, if it made you angry that you weren't taught this in school, here's what I need from you. Share this video everywhere. Post it on social media. Send it to friends who love history. Tell people about Adwa and why it matters. Leave a comment about what struck you most, what surprised you, what you want to learn more about. Subscribe if you want more history that doesn't pull punches or sugarcoat uncomfortable truths. We're building something here. A community of people who want real history, complete history, uncomfortable history, not the simplified version designed for standardized tests. And every like, every comment, every share helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. History isn't boring lists of dates and dead kings. It's not memorizing which European signed which treaty or which battle happened in which year. It's human beings making impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure. It's empires rising and falling based on choices made in critical moments. It's the constant reminder that nothing in history was inevitable, that underdogs can win, that arrogance and assumption get punished, that preparation and intelligence beat complacency every single time. It's proof that the story you were told isn't always the story that actually happened. March 1st, 1896. The Battle of Adwa. An Ethiopian army of 100,000 men destroys an Italian army of 17,000 in the mountains of northern Ethiopia. 7,000 Italians killed. 3,000 captured. Ethiopia remains independent. Italy's government collapses. The myth of European invincibility shatters. Colonized peoples worldwide take notice and take hope. Pan-Africanism finds its foundational symbol and proof of concept. History changes direction. One battle. One day. Everything changes. Remember it. Remember Adwa. Remember that resistance is possible. Remember that underdogs can win. Remember that the powerful can be defeated. Remember that nothing is inevitable. Remember.